A very good morning or evening, depending on where you are right now. And to all who are joining us for this 1-hour webinar today as both participants and viewers. This is Sally Chiu from Diagnostic Polytechnic, bringing to you the very first in 2016 of the series of bi-monthly live webinars brought to you jointly by the Singapore Training and Development Association, better known as STADA in Singapore, and Diagnostic Polytechnic Center for Transcultural Studies. Today, we are very privileged to have with us Arthur Woods, co-founder of Imperative, a company in the business of reshaping the world the way we empower people and measure success in the workplace. He's a writer, speaker, and advisor to leading brands on the future of work. He worked previously for Google, where he led operations for YouTube, the educational division, and of course very much YouTube in the schools. He has pioneered many initiatives. Among some of those he pioneered, he also co-founded the Campus Fellowship, the largest collegiate social enterprise training program, and Out in Tech, a leading global LGBTQ tech community. He graduated from Georgetown University, where he studied operations and info management. He also studied in Stanford University. He is a World Economic Forum Global Shaper, a New York Venture Fellow, sits on many boards, including the board of Georgetown Tech Alliance, Campus, and Out in Tech. What's he going to talk about today? Research has confirmed what we always known. People carry your culture, and the drivers of performance are those who value work beyond the paycheck. And here, this is where we say purpose trumps the paycheck often. They see work as a way to empower others. They find personal fulfillment in what they do. And these are what Arthur calls purpose-oriented employees. And these are 28% of the workforce. They represent every demographic segment. They are your highest performers by every measure. In high demand, hiring them is an imperative and quite difficult. And for today, Arthur will share with us 3 things about how do we identify and hire purpose-oriented employees, how do we know about what purpose means for leaders of the next economy, and he is generously sharing with us Imperative's latest research, how purpose is leading the way to high performance and well-being in the workplace. And this is time to hand over to the expert. Arthur, over to you.
Thank you, Sally. It's great to meet you here. And I hear a bit of an echo, if anyone's hearing that. I think that's better now. Great. So thank you so much for having me, and I want to thank STADA, the Center for Transcultural Studies, and Robert and Anton. Thank you so much for having me. It really is a pleasure to share this work, and I intend to make this very much, a dialogue. So what I'll do here is provide a briefing on our research to date, and really want to engage you all in this process of uncovering, as Sally mentioned, the purpose-oriented worker. What does it really mean? And what does this mean for us as future leaders in the workforce? How can we reframe success? How can we use this information to potentially build a new model for what work will really look like? So I will start by going through this presentation. And Sally, I'm guessing you can see this okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Wonderful. So I want to start by sharing really a story about hospital janitors. This was an account that really inspired me to get into this work when I read it. So some researchers that we partnered with very early on had been studying people's psychological orientation to work. And what they discovered was there were distinctive ways in which people viewed work and the role that it would play in their life. To really uncover these different psychological orientations, these researchers went into hospitals, of all places. and they interviewed various employees within hospitals, not just doctors, not just nurses, but actually also hospital janitors. And what they discovered was there were many hospital doctors and nurses that were not just there to make a difference. There were many hospital doctors and nurses that were there primarily for status and for money. At the same time, there were also hospital janitors that saw the primary role that work played in their life is actually delivering them purpose. And this was sort of astonishing because if anyone has had a chance to meet a hospital janitor, they often have the most grueling job you can imagine. They're oftentimes very much underpaid. In many cases, they're seen as third-class citizens of hospitals. Doctors and nurses oftentimes mistreat hospital janitors. Yet, so many hospital janitors that these researchers had a chance to interview saw their work rich in purpose, and these interviewers wanted to uncover how. So in finding out that these hospital janitors had purpose, they actually discovered that a number of them were completely reframing the story of their work to not just be sweeping floors, but actually fundamentally to be creating a safe patient experience. These researchers found that hospital janitors were going above and beyond in their roles, not just to clean up messes, but actually to serve as translators between doctors and patients that didn't speak the same language. They were actually bringing humor to the patient experience. They were moving paintings around in long-term care facilities where patients actually had to stare at the same painting every day. These doctors, they learned, were actually going above and beyond, in many cases, to bring more care to the patient experience than money and status-oriented doctors. So this work really, inspired me because it showed that purpose was possible for anyone at any job, that there was a unique type of employee that we could begin to assess, this purpose-oriented worker, as Sally mentioned earlier. And that if purpose was possible for a hospital janitor, it was possible for anyone. So I myself was previously at Google, where I was leading education operations at YouTube, and I was helping the team there build one of the largest repositories of educational content. We were charged with really trying to transform the way that YouTube could be used as a source of access and information. And I had a chance over the course of my time at Google to interface with many people that were just starting their careers. And what I noticed was they were fundamentally looking for something much more than just a paycheck. The millennials that I had a chance to mentor and coach were coming to work looking for a sense of impact, a sense of relationship and community, a sense of personal growth and development, a series of deep incentives that were not just Google bonuses. And I had a chance to meet Aaron Hurst. Aaron was the founder of an organization I had come to know called the Taproot Foundation. And in early 2001, Aaron entered the pro bono space, and it really only existed in the legal profession. So you had lawyers that were donating their time to serve local nonprofits. And what Aaron noticed was that countless professional contacts of his had amazing skill sets in HR, in sales, and in marketing. And when they would try to go serve the community, there weren't really outlets for them to take those skills and actually serve local nonprofits. So Aaron created a marketplace that would connect skilled professionals to local nonprofit organizations that were looking for those skill sets. And over the course of 15 years, he built up what is today a $15 billion marketplace in pro bono. What Aaron discovered over the course of that time actually was that all of the professionals he engaged said that the pro bono work that they were doing was more fulfilling than their full-time jobs. And at first Aaron said, "This is incredible. I've built the Disneyland for work." But he realized that this had enormous implications on our full-time job where we spend the majority of our lives every day. So what Aaron and I realized when we first met was that we had the same core takeaway from two enormously different vantage points. That pro bono consultants are coming to work really as a means to an end, and they're seeking purpose at work, but they're having to flock to pro bono to achieve that. And the various millennials that I was engaging at Google were in search of not waiting until retirement to experience purpose. So purpose was top of mind for both of us. And what we wanted to do was uncover how on earth could we begin to measure purpose. It was such a cerebral term that carried weight in so many different ways for different people. So we built Imperative as the primary mechanism for us to uncover what purpose really meant, but moreover how to deliver and measure it in the workplace so that purpose could actually become a strategic opportunity for companies, could become an accessible resource for employees. Aaron wrote The Purpose Economy, which really was a manifesto for us, arguing that while we've seen three predominant economies to date, the agrarian, the industrial, and the information economy, the iPhone is not the last stop in human evolution. In fact, the creation of value for human beings could be the next catalyst for economic growth and development. And just as we've seen the industrial economy build on the agrarian economy and the information economy build on the industrial economy, we really believed that there would be a new economy built on the information economy centered around the creation of value for human beings, with the most enormous implications on the workplace. So in many ways, while we haven't quite caught up to the information economy in every industry, we still believe that there's an opportunity to advance beyond the information economy to really start to look at how we can create a human-centered approach to everything that we do, and the economic value will come of that. So for us, imperative really became the implication of the purpose economy on the workplace. How could we reimagine work so that it was human-centered, so that it prioritized the need of purpose for everyone in their day-to-day jobs? What we learned in our early work was that there were two fundamentally different workforces, that you could actually segment the workforce by two different groups. The first group, highly transactional, looking at work as a means of ego gain and financial gain. The second group, seeing work not as a means to an end, but actually as a means of supporting other people. So really, we began to bucket these two, purpose-oriented workers versus non-purpose-oriented workers. So purpose-oriented workers primarily saw their work as a means of serving other people and achieving fulfillment for themselves. These people, if you were to ask them if they won the lottery, for example, they would not stop working altogether. They would see work as a means of serving others, of achieving fulfillment. They would not see work as a means to an end. Whereas non-purpose-oriented workers broke down into two buckets, money-oriented and status-oriented. These people saw work as a means of purely financial gain and status gain. If you were to ask them if they won the lottery, they would stop working. I'll give you a really great example of this. The other day I was speaking to a fellow, and I asked him what would happen if he won the lottery. And what he said was, I would actually become a waiter. And this was a perfect example of a purpose-oriented worker, because a non-purpose-oriented worker or a money and status-oriented worker would say, a waiter does not get paid a lot, and it's not a very glamorous job title, so why would you do that? But a purpose-oriented worker is someone who's really wired for work, sees work as a means of achieving enrichment, and can't really imagine the idea of retiring and stop working altogether, because it's a source of betterment. So we can really begin to think of people falling in these two buckets. Now what's interesting is these psychological orientations are formed early on in our adolescence, largely influenced by the way that our role models, specifically our mothers, look at work. It's not necessarily one-for-one, but our role models have a significant influence on the way that we will see work. And just like personality traits, we find that work orientation between these two buckets really does not change for people. This is fundamentally changing the way that people see the world. And so there's a very kind of easy question that's asked around, can we change people? And what we tend to find in our work so far is that this psychological orientation does not change unless you have a significant life event that causes you to rewrite the way that you see the world working. We tend to find that this can happen, for example, in a midlife crisis, oftentimes in people's 40s and 50s. But again, we don't recommend that companies facilitate midlife crises. So the purpose-oriented worker, as we really started to dive in more, this became the archetype of employee that we obsessed over. We were curious, how are these people showing up? Where were they in the workforce? What were they prioritizing? And were we seeing any sort of unique correlation between key performance metrics and this employee archetype? What we learned was that purpose-oriented workers prioritize three things, which for us really become the definition of purpose. They prioritize relationships, impact, and growth. So having a deep sense of community, feeling connected with a sense of belonging to what you do, having a sense of impact, feeling that your work actually makes a difference, that your work creates value for yourself and other people, and growing and learning personally. These three things, I guarantee, if you find a purpose-oriented worker who is disengaged and unfulfilled, one of these three things is missing. So relationships, impact, and growth, or RIG as we call it, becomes a really interesting barometer for how we can gauge success for a purpose-oriented worker in the workforce. The second key point is that we each experience purpose in a unique way. We each have a blueprint of intrinsic motivators that inform the way that we cognitively frame our work and how we experience fulfillment in that work. So just like a psychological orientation to work, this unique pattern, which we call your purpose type or your purpose pattern, becomes the unique lens through which you can experience fulfillment in your day-to-day work. And we have an instrument, a diagnostic that I can share later on, that helps people uncover what this pattern is for them. So really, as we look at the workforce, there are two different ways of assessing purpose. And these really break down by traits versus states. Now, traditionally, when we look at employee engagement, we have really been talking about states. To what extent are you engaged? To what extent are you fulfilled? To what extent are you happy? These fluctuate over time. They're dependent on environments. Now, what's interesting, however, is there are a whole series of hardwired traits that don't change when people change their environments. And when we talk about psychological work orientation, when we talk about intrinsic drivers and personality, these are examples of traits. So what I really implore us to do as we look at measuring success in the workplace is not just to focus on states. Employee engagement has done a beautiful job of measuring people's current levels of work engagement and well-being. But those aren't predictive measures. So when we conduct an engagement survey, we really don't know which levers to pull to drive change in our workforce. So it's fascinating for us to start looking at measuring traits, employee work orientation, for example. And again, we find that as people change job functions and job levels, traits do not change. So there's an opportunity to really measure one to get to the other. So our Workforce Purpose Index was a study that we conducted just recently this last fall in 2015. And what we wanted to uncover with this study was how are purpose-oriented workers showing up in the workplace? Where are they? To what extent are they aligned and fulfilled to their jobs? How are they distributed across industries? And so this was a study of over 6,000 people across the United States workforce. I'll talk to you in a bit about our aspirations to do this globally. And this was a fascinating study for us. We wanted to really understand how are purpose-oriented workers showing up. And what was fascinating was this was really the first study of its kind at this scale. What we learned, as Sally mentioned earlier, was that purpose-oriented workers represent 28% of the United States population. So of the 150 million members of the US workforce, 42 million people see work as a means of helping other people and achieving fulfillment. They were across industries, across sectors, and we, of course, had the opportunity to see how they showed up in terms of their performance. What we learned was women were more likely to be purpose-oriented than men, by a bit. We learned that millennials, despite popular belief, millennials and Gen Z were not the only purpose generation. In fact, in this case, baby boomers were more likely to be purpose-oriented than millennials. So we oftentimes hear this sort of myth that the younger generations are the only ones seeking purpose at work. What we discovered, however, was, especially thanks to likely a lot of the midlife crises that happen, where people are caused to really rewrite their story of the way that the world works and the role that work will play in their lives, we have a number of people in the older generations that do not see work as a means to an end. They actually see work as a source of enrichment and fulfillment. So we saw that this really rose as people got older. We assessed 4 kind of key areas here around the purpose-oriented worker. We were interested in knowing what competencies have they developed. Are their competencies showing up differently than other members of the workforce? Is there a higher expected tenure? Are we expecting them to stay in their jobs longer? Are there higher levels of fulfillment across the 3 areas we talked about earlier, relationships, impact, and growth? And finally, are we seeing that purpose-oriented workers are more likely to be advocates of the company and their brand than their colleagues? So the first thing that we learned is that purpose-oriented workers show up dramatically differently than their colleagues in terms of how they show competencies. They're more likely to be self-advocates and advocate for their own needs. They're more likely to work on self-improvement. They're more comfortable embracing change, so they're more adaptable to transitions. And they're more likely able to engage senior management, to skip levels and actually communicate with people of senior level in the company. We learned that they were 14% more likely to stay in their job longer than 2 years. So it really showed, especially as we start to see high numbers of attrition in younger generations, your purpose-oriented workers, if they're aligned and fulfilled, are more likely to stay in their job longer. We found that they were actually way more likely to experience high levels of impact, relationships, and growth in their jobs. So we looked at those three areas, again, which we find to be our barometer of purpose, that can change throughout someone's changing career. So these do indeed fluctuate. But what we learned was, across the board, if you were purpose-oriented and you saw work as more than a means to an end, you were more likely to actually experience purpose across the board in these three areas. So this really gave hope for trying to find people that had higher potential to be engaged and be fulfilled in their jobs, that the purpose-oriented worker really kind of fit under that possibility. We found that purpose-oriented workers have a higher employee net promoter score, so they're actually more likely to be brand ambassadors, while money and status-oriented workers are actually more likely to be detractors of the company. So especially as companies are starting to look at who will be the culture captains of their brand that advocate for the company or advocate for the organization on its behalf externally, purpose-oriented workers are more likely to fit that bill. So across sectors, we found that purpose-oriented workers showed up differently. The first thing was that education scored higher than any other industry in terms of purpose-oriented workers. So 50% of the education sector was purpose-oriented, which would be interesting. You know, you look at this and say, that's amazing, education scored so high compared to, say, retail at the very bottom. But if you look at this a different way, this still means that 50% of teachers primarily see work as a means of gaining financial resources and status above actually serving students. So I look at this and say, this actually is somewhat startling. And 55% of nonprofit employees still come to work primarily for status and money above impact. Fascinating. So we can go all the way down to find that agriculture, forestry and fishery, entertainment, healthcare, aerospace, aviation, automotive, and pharmaceuticals fall above the national average, while consulting, engineering, government, all the way down to retail fall below. One of the fascinating takeaways here was that technology was actually quite low at 20%. I'm sorry, 19%. And at least in Silicon Valley, we find that technology companies really believe they are recruiting purpose-oriented workers. But oftentimes, they're brokering a lot of extrinsic benefits. And we're finding that these technology companies, in fact, are attracting more people there for money and for status than for impact. So as we look at this, especially as we start to conduct this study year after year, this provides some fascinating implications for how we reimagine the value proposition that each of these industries is really providing. To what extent are they branding themselves as being attractive to purpose-oriented workers and fulfilling that need? We're beginning to cross paths with a lot of retailers, especially, who are reimagining how they can attract a purpose-oriented workforce, because these are the people that are interacting with your customers. These are the people that are creating remarkable customer experiences. So this entire breakdown of industry provides us with a fascinating way of reimagining success in the workplace built around the purpose-oriented worker. I want to provide a couple case studies because I think at STADA there's a huge opportunity to look at how does this actually translate to a specific company. So LinkedIn contacted us last year, fascinated about purpose. They had seen some of our work, and their CEO, Jeff Weiner, was really interested in how LinkedIn could start to play in the equation with purpose. So they contacted us to conduct a study within LinkedIn around their employees. They wanted to know how many people here are purpose-oriented, how are those individuals showing up differently, and how could we potentially start to recalibrate our culture to be prioritizing those individuals. So what we learned was, in conducting a poll of LinkedIn's over 9,000 employees, a representative sample of their employees, we learned that 41% of LinkedIn's employees were purpose-oriented. And LinkedIn shared its performance data with us, so its existing performance data, and we learned that purpose-oriented workers were 30% higher on LinkedIn's performance scale. So this was fascinating. These people outperformed their colleagues by every single measure. They were significantly higher net promoters of LinkedIn's brand. They had higher competencies, and in this case, higher performance directly. We actually learned that LinkedIn's purpose-oriented workers were lowest in LinkedIn's finance department. So LinkedIn actually came back to us and asked us to help them hire more purpose-oriented workers in their finance department. So we worked with them to design an applicant screener that could be embedded in the hiring process that would predict whether someone was purpose-oriented. So using a series of psychometrics tied to key behaviors built around the purpose-oriented archetype, we were able to identify purpose-oriented applicants. And now today, LinkedIn is screening for those people. What we found, interestingly enough, was that we could compare LinkedIn to the technology industry. And so the two things that had come from the Workforce Purpose Index that I just shared were the percentage of purpose-oriented workers in each sector, but also the high levels of high fulfillment. So we looked at across relationships, impact, and growth, those three key areas that measure purpose. To what extent were people in technology showing up as purpose-oriented workers, and then to what extent were they fulfilled? So LinkedIn was bravely outperforming its technology sector. So more than twice the industry average of purpose-oriented workers, and a significantly higher level of fulfillment for its employees compared to the tech sector. So the question for LinkedIn then became, how can we hold on to this? The good news is that LinkedIn is investing a lot in continuing to recruit purpose-oriented workers and continuing to drive employee fulfillment across those three areas through its talent strategy. West Elm has been another major partner of ours in this organizational transformation surrounding purpose. So West Elm really kind of came across our radar when their president, Jim Brett, who is a very visionary individual, said he wanted his entire workforce to be about purpose. He didn't want to just broker money and promotions. He wanted his people to be coming to work for something so much more than that. So again, we conducted a purpose index at West Elm, and we learned that 49% of their employees were purpose-oriented, significantly higher than the retail sector of 19%. We learned that their purpose-oriented workers, again, outperformed their colleagues by every single measure. They were higher net promoters of the brand, they had greater competencies, they were more generously supportive of their colleagues and their customers. They really just were the highest potential employees. And West Elm discovered that growth as well as organizational alignment was very low for those individuals. What they discovered was actually their purpose-oriented workers that were poorly fulfilled and poorly aligned actually were lowest on the performance scale, while their highly aligned, highly fulfilled employees were highest. So this really gave us some interesting data to show that companies can't just hire purpose-oriented workers, they also have to fulfill the promise. It would be like paying a money-oriented employee that's so incentivized by money below living wage and expecting them to then perform. So a purpose-oriented worker is seeking purpose at work. So in this case for West Elm, they needed to also broker intrinsic benefits to their people, and that's something that they've really focused on over the last year. So West Elm focused on alignment and growth, especially in its onboarding process, to look at how they brought in new employees to really maximize their alignment fulfillment. West Elm is now actually undergoing their second purpose index. They're using this now as a recurring barometer for the level of purpose and well-being of their people, and it's fascinating to now come out with the new results. So I want to give a couple examples of how this translates all the way down to the employee experience. So I of course, was just talking about West Elm, and this was really at the corporate level in their headquarters. But what we've seen West Elm do all the way down to their retail locations as a furniture retailer that's across the United States and now increasingly going global, is actually transforming the way that West Elm employees describe their jobs. So similar to the way that hospital janitors were rewriting the story of their work to be about more than just sweeping floors, West Elm employees at the retail level are actually rewriting their job description to not just be about stocking shelves and ringing people up, but also to serve as ambassadors to new families visiting the community or moving to the community. So, of course, when you're a new family moving to the community, one of the first things you have to do is buy furniture. And West Elm realized that they could completely elevate the role of their employees at the retail level to actually be serving as ambassadors to these new families. So what they're doing, what they're seeing their stores do is host community dinners. They're seeing their employees actually going out of their way to introduce new families to the community, to show new families around. They're bringing tremendous meaning to their work every day, and in fact, driving greater sales, greater customer loyalty, and it's actually good for the business. So it's a great example of where the definition of success because they're orienting toward a purpose-oriented worker archetype. They're prioritizing the needs of someone that is looking for intrinsic benefits from their work every day. And it's not just about philanthropy, it's actually core to the business. We've had a chance recently to cross paths with Virgin, and Virgin is setting out to do a very exciting new endeavor where they're completely reimagining the cruise industry. To date, cruise lines have been known to marginalize employees. The most interesting and kind of scary story is cruise lines that actually charge their employees, their own employees, to use wireless internet on the cruise line. Oftentimes, internet that costs more than the living wage that these cruise lines are paying people. So Virgin, in its very kind of radical and progressive sense, came in and said they wanted to transform what success looked like in the cruise industry. What they've done is they've conceptualized a new type of cruise line that attracts purpose-oriented workers, that attracts service purpose-oriented workers, starting with who they're hiring with their crew. And not only are they looking at how they can give these people intrinsic benefits and new benefits that also meet their material needs, but to fundamentally transform the employee experience so that these employees are set up to create amazing customer experiences. Virgin, if you've had a chance to meet any Virgin employee, already really prioritizes their people. They invest so much in the development and well-being of their people. And they're seeing this translate to the new cruise line that they're building. So they'll have 3 ships now in the coming 5 years, and they'll have over 4,500 new staff members, all of which they hope to be purpose-oriented. I'll mention also that Amazon is even looking at this. Amazon is taking a different spin on this to look at how they can assess whether someone has good fortune in their life. What Amazon has learned is that when they find out that someone indeed believes that they are lucky and they have good fortune, they're more likely to be high-performing, customer-centered employees. So Amazon's looking at the purpose-oriented worker largely through to what extent they have this sort of optimism in the sense of good fortune. So it's fascinating to see how companies from West Elm to Virgin to Amazon are looking at this. I truly believe that as we start to reimagine the future workforce centered around the purpose-oriented worker, every company is going to have a unique flavor as to how they identify and support those people. So here's a really awesome opportunity, especially as we talk about the amazing work that's being done, especially in Singapore. How can we reimagine HR? If we think about the purpose-oriented worker and who will really be the owner, the stakeholder that looks at the needs of that individual, that starts to fundamentally redesign our talent strategy around the intrinsic needs of a purpose-oriented worker, who will really own that? My belief is that it's HR, that our human resources leaders will be the people that are charged with owning the new strategy that's centered around purpose. And I think there are 4 key opportunities here around purpose, around supporting the purpose-oriented worker. The first is to use purpose as a new metric for success. We now, thanks to the great research that's been done by many amazing academics and research that we've had a chance to contribute to at Imperative, we now have metrics for purpose. Purpose no longer has to be in the clouds, only about charity and philanthropy. It can be strategic. We can now uncover who is purpose-oriented and to what extent people's needs are met and aligned in their jobs every day through the lens of purpose. So this can be a new metric for success. If you're like LinkedIn, if you're like West Elm, this can be something that you're actually gauging for your workforce on a recurring basis. I believe, second, we have a chance to rewrite the entire employee value proposition to support the purpose-oriented worker. I think as we start to imagine our workforce to date and who we've designed it for, when you start to see extremely bureaucratic, money and status-oriented structures that have been built primarily around seeing the minimum amount that we can pay people to get them to do work, or mainly giving people incentives of new job titles to move them up and to get them to change their work behavior. We've really oriented toward the wrong archetype. We've basically said we don't believe work itself can be fulfilling, so we have to pay you to get you to stay, or we have to give you a better job title to get you to stay. If we change our perception of who we're designing work for, and we start to look at the needs of a purpose-oriented worker, a deep sense of impact, relationships, and growth at work every day, we start to see work take a radical new shape. We start to see work that has new creative agency, gives people a sense of autonomy, gives people the ability to create and create impact in their work every day. So there's an awesome opportunity right now to redesign the entire employee value proposition by empathizing with the needs of the purpose-oriented employee. And I believe that the companies like West Elm, like LinkedIn, that begin to really put themselves in the shoes of their purpose-oriented workers, that start to hire more of those people and prioritize those needs, those are going to be the companies that actually win the war on talent and outperform their competitors. The third thing that we see companies like LinkedIn and West Elm already doing is screening for work orientation in the hiring process to fundamentally get at the question, what is incentivizing you as an employee to come to work every day? What is causing you to come to this job? Is it really material and ego gain, or is it impact and relationships? So again, thanks to some of the work that we've had a chance to do, as well as others, we have the ability now to screen for this. This is something that can be assessed up front. What is the psychological work orientation of the people that you're hiring? Finally, we can see purpose as a way of radically transforming the entire employee life cycle, especially in the way that we onboard people. So I mentioned earlier that we each have this unique archetype for how we experience purpose, and I'll share later on how we can start to harness the new instruments for helping people onboard so that they feel aligned and clear as to what drives them and how they bring themselves to their role in the first place. So I mentioned earlier that we've had a chance now to look at a ton of interesting metrics for assessing purpose. And one of the things that we've been really proud to have developed recently is a purpose hiring screener. And this actually helps predict who will be purpose-oriented in the workforce in your application pool. So this helps you actually uncover who is coming to work for more than just a paycheck and more than just a promotion. We've had a chance to now work with a number of great companies that are using this in the way they assess new talent. The other piece of this, which I encourage you to check out if you have a chance, is really helping people uncover their unique purpose drivers. What I mentioned earlier was we each actually have a unique way in which we experience purpose and intrinsic motivation in the workplace. What we've learned is that there are three key ways in which we experience purpose. The first is based on who you impact or the scale of your impact. What we've learned is that people are on a spectrum between individual all the way to societal scale impact, how they frame why their work matters. The second dimension is actually why you work. And what we found is that people have a view of social progress in the way that the world works, between advancement or karma and fairness or harmony. And we found that people are oriented toward the way that they see the world work through one of these two. Finally, we've been able to assess the way that people are most intrinsically motivated to solve problems. We find that people fall into one of four categories: taking a human-centered approach, a community-oriented approach, a structure-driven approach, or a knowledge-oriented approach. So the combination of these three areas provides one of 24 different archetypes. So we each fall into one of these three. And what's interesting is these become a pattern that stays with you throughout your changing career, just like your psychological orientation to work. We've now had nearly 60,000 people actually take this assessment. It's a 30-question diagnostic online. It's completely free. There's a premium 20-page report that you're welcome to go get if it's of interest. But you can actually get this at imperative.com/sign-up. You can find it on the site. This is a really interesting way to start articulating uniquely what motivates you in your day-to-day job. We have a tool that helps you create your own purpose statement, a way of actually articulating your three drivers in a way that actually means something to you. So this becomes a nice North Star mission statement for yourself. So this has some really interesting implications on talent development, helping teams come together, helping managers more greatly empathize with their team. We've seen it used in performance reviews. So it has a really interesting set of implications on learning and development and training especially. So with that, I want to wrap up and give everyone some time to ask questions. Sally, Robert, I know you might have some questions, so I'm excited to use the next 20 minutes or so to really explore what you're seeing and where this adds the most value.
Thank you so much, Arthur. Viewers, if you're watching from YouTube or STADA's Google+, you can start typing in your questions now for Arthur, and we'll be happy to pass them on to Arthur to answer. I see Robert here. Robert?
Yes, Ali.
Would you like to pose the first question?
Okay, I'll start with the first question. I liked what you're sharing. I just wonder whether you could, Arthur, correlate your findings to actually the individual life journey. I see that the purpose-driven category that is driving, it was highest at the older age group and also was high at the younger age group.
Right.
If I were to interpret this in terms of life journey, I would say that when you are young and you're single and you leave college, you are full of ambition and purpose of wanting to change the world. And therefore, that drives your purpose-driven objectives. And then you transit into family, your children, and you got to bring them up. Your focus may therefore change. And then comes the so-called the retirement group, the older workers who now has gone past that journey of bringing up young families, so children probably are now married, yeah, and therefore they now can focus on what value they want to serve their purpose in terms of their life journey.
Right.
So I just wonder whether there's any correlation, and would you like to comment on that?
It's a great question, Robert, and I appreciate you asking, because what we're again learning is that this orientation tends to stay with people throughout their changing career, and won't really fluctuate based on your current life situation unless you had a significant life event enough that could really cause you to rewrite the way that you see work fundamentally. And so I think it is a really astute assumption. You know, part of what happens, I think, between the millennial and baby boomer eras, at least in that life cycle, is some significant event that causes someone to rewrite their perception of work. And there are a couple kind of key beliefs we have there. One of which is there is a point at which you have worked so hard and you start realizing that work no longer has to be a means to an end, but you want to start thinking about legacy. You want to start thinking about really bringing enrichment to what you do every day. And so we do believe that a lot of the younger generations, especially, which have been told by their role models that work is a means to an end, that they need to prioritize making money and making people proud, making their families proud, to really see success at work. They're entering the workforce not purpose-oriented. And perhaps throughout somewhere in their adult life, they're being caused to rewrite that story. So one of the key opportunities that we see is to actually start setting a new role model for our kids, that setting a new story that work does not just have to be a means to an end, but can indeed be a source of fulfillment and enrichment. So I would imagine that younger generations are coming into the workforce. The vast majority are not seeing work as a means to achieve impact and fulfillment. They're seeking that outside of work, and we know that the very progressive millennial generation is indeed socially conscious. So it's not at all asserting that they're not, but that they're not seeing work as a vehicle for that, which is really too bad. And again, that later on in life they're being caused to rewrite that perception of work. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I see this as interesting because as we talk about countries that is having high population of aging, like Japan, even Singapore and all that, the employers tend to think that the older workers seems to lack energy, right? And therefore, how I felt that your research could actually go into, when you say purpose, is not necessarily driven by your energy level, but by your passion to want to make things happen. So how does this drive in terms of changing the concept of recruitment, that older people, while they lack energy, they have a higher level of purpose-driven passion that actually overcome that lack of energy because they're older?
That's a great question. So we don't really, in this case, we didn't assess engagement, which I think starts to get into energy and passion for work. We have found that in cases where we have been able to correlate data of purpose-oriented workers and engagement or energy, there's a higher tendency to be engaged by purpose-oriented workers. But one thing that might be causing, in this case, even if we were to go to Japan, for example, and discover that older generations were indeed more purpose-oriented than younger generations, but that the level of energy and engagement was still low, that could actually point to the fact that those employees feel poorly fulfilled and poorly aligned in the work that they're doing. So we're finding that there's not a direct translation between purpose-oriented workers and highly engaged and fulfilled and performing workers if they're poorly aligned to the work that they're doing. So in this case, what I would want to assess in that case is there indeed a higher percentage of purpose-oriented workers in older generations? And if for any reason they're not performing or they're less engaged than other generations, is there a reason for that? And could it be poor alignment to their roles? So organizations are needing to not only recruit more purpose-oriented workers, but also ensure that there's a high degree of alignment and fulfillment in that work.
Thank you, Arthur. I think that is really where we should go. Yeah, thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robert. Great questions.
I see Adrian Chong, Principal Consultant of Urbana Leadership. Adrian, do you have a question for Arthur?
Yes, sorry I joined you only halfway.
Don't worry, Adrian.
Apologies. I've just got a question because I noticed you address purpose, from the readings of your website also, more from an individual point of view. Do you address purpose from a corporate point of view and stating of a corporate purpose and giving that meaning to the organization?
Yes, so it's a great question. One of the things we've been able to do in our research is actually uncover individuals' perception of the organizational purpose. And I mentioned the 3 different dimensions that we can assess for an individual: who they impact, why they work, how they solve problems. Actually, what we've learned is that it's possible to get the same archetype for an organization, to collect from the individuals that comprise an organization what they perceive to be those 3 dimensions. So does the organization most impact society or individuals or other organizations? Does it is it mostly there to create advancement or create fairness? And what problem-solving technique is it taking? And what we've learned is that actually creates a taxonomy for defining organizational purpose. And in places where the individual taxonomy or individual pattern most aligns to that organizational pattern, we find that there's a higher degree of fulfillment. So if I am most individually driven, and I take a human-centered approach to problem solving to experience fulfillment, and I'm part of an organization where that pattern actually completely aligns, I'm more likely to be fulfilled in my job every day. Okay. So I think it's an amazing question. This really can be seen at the organizational level, and when we start to look at it that way, it helps a leader start to articulate a much more authentic message as to why the organization exists to the employee that's coming to the organization. So the organizational alignment is a really key piece. If you're a purpose-oriented worker, but you aren't aligned to the work that you're doing every day, you're likely to be disengaged in the work. And so we see that as a really crucial component. And for leaders that intend to have a very strong purpose-driven culture, it's important that they really kind of set that North Star. Why does this organization exist, and how do we translate that to each individual employee experience?
Okay. Do you have any suggestions of how best to construct a purpose statement for an organization?
Yes. I mean, so if you were to go on to our site and personify the organization in terms of how you answer the 30 questions, it would be questions like, who does our organization most impact? Is it individuals? Is it the collective of other organizations? Or is it society? Why does our organization exist? Are we here to create advancement and opportunity, or are we here to create equality and fairness? And then finally, what tactical approach does our organization take to its problem solving? I'll give you a really great example. At Imperative, when we first started, we were sort of all over the map in that area, in those areas. We were trying to kind of serve everyone. We were taking kind of every problem-solving technique approach, and we had sort of essences of fairness and opportunity in the way that we were sort of seeing the world work. And so we were really sort of doing everything mediocrely. And finally, when we were able to articulate our purpose type, which became really about individuals, advancement or karma, and taking a knowledge-oriented approach to problem solving, it became a really clear decision-making tool for us when we started to take on new opportunities, we would put them through the test of, is this serving individuals? Is it creating advancement? Is it taking a knowledge-oriented approach to problem solving? And it became kind of our three-way test for decision making. So I think it's a really healthy thing for organizations to go through. Now, we've created the instrument for individuals to go through it, but you can put yourself in the shoes of the organization as you're answering those questions, and still come out with some pattern for yourself.
Okay. And you say this questions or archetype, we can find it on your website, is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So it's justanimperative.com, and if you click sign up, you'll see, you'll create a quick account and you can answer the 30 questions.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Great question.
Oh, thank you, Arthur. It appears that a lot of what you have said, there must be actually a lot of clarity in the purpose of the organization, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the more clear that an organization can get about its reason for being there, you know, we really believe that the more aligned an employee base can be, and the clearer the communication can be, and also the clearer decisions can be. And organizations, you know, I think Built to Last was such a great example of a book of the organizations that had found their purpose, found really why they existed, and the ones that could articulate that and embrace their purpose and their values were the ones that did indeed persevere and outcompete.
You mentioned two buckets of workers. I'll just conveniently label them as the transactional worker and perhaps the transformational worker, the one who likes to change for the better. And you mentioned in your assessment traits and states. You made reference to this thing called the intrinsic driver. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about what is this intrinsic driver?
Absolutely. So the intrinsic drivers were what I was referring to earlier, and I'll pull up the screen again just so we can view this. So these are the intrinsic drivers. Again, this is a diagnostic. You would call it like a Myers-Briggs or a strength finder for purpose. And so if those two answer sort of the what and the how, this helps you answer the why. What we've learned is that people experience purpose. They have a blueprint for the way in which they experience intrinsic motivation in their day-to-day work. And so the purpose drivers are these three categories: who you impact, why you work, and how you solve problems. The combination of these three gives you one of 24 different archetypes, and we've given these archetypes names for convenience. So the giver, the empowerer, the inquirer, the level, a number of different names that help you categorize these. So what you can do on our site, and I gave you the link right here, is actually answer these 30 questions to uncover your purpose type. And this becomes a fascinating way that you can start assessing the extent to which you're aligned to your role. This maps, if you get the premium report, it maps to a series of core competencies we recommend you focus on developing. It gives you a clear way of communicating what fulfills you to your colleagues. So there are a number of really interesting applications for this, but these are the intrinsic drivers that I was referring to. Oh, sorry, I think you're on mute.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
And are they all of equal weightage or value?
They are. They are. So unlike, you know, work orientation, which I love the way that you described it, Sally, the transactional versus transformational. Clearly, in the way that we label, that you've labeled that, and the way that we label the money versus status versus purpose-oriented worker, we have attributed value to the purpose-oriented worker. They indeed are the most desirable workers. They outperform their colleagues. They're most generously supportive of their customers. But the purpose drivers, or the intrinsic drivers, carry equal weight. You need all of them. So there is not a purpose driver, a who driver, for example, between individual and society that's more important than the other. You need them all. And it's largely based on cognitive framing of our work. So I'll give you a good example. We've done some work in customer support, customer service, and we've learned that you can have two customer support representatives that are answering phones every day. And one frames their impact based on its societal impact, while as one frames its impact based on their ability to impact individual lives. Both employees can sit in the same job function, and be completely fulfilled at the same time. But it's largely how they frame why they work and the story of their impact. So for an organization, there's a unique opportunity here to reimagine that your workforce is not all fulfilled by the same things, and that people do not have to change their role to actually experience fulfillment in their day-to-day job.
I see. Thank you so much. That's helpful.
Sure.
I'm not sure if Robert or Adrian would want to have another question. Robert? Or Justin? Well, Justin has a question.
Here we go. Hey, Justin. Oh, I think you might be on mute. There we go.
Can you hear us now? Yeah, I'll approach it from as an educator dealing with people who will be entering the workforce. I mean, Robert asked from the older generation, the millennials and above, but Gen Y, Gen IY, how do we not say induce a midlife crisis, but how do we get them to that realization?
Yes, so far the good news is we're finding in adolescence people are still forming that story about work, and they're largely grounding to their early vocational experiences, internships. Their experience in college is learning a means to an end, or am I here to actually learn? So the good news is, the earlier the better in terms of how we can create that story for adolescents and their approach to work, the better. But we found that in college there still is room to tell that narrative and help people start to see that work does not have to just be a means to an end. So I think the ability for where we're seeing this really take off is focusing on the humanities, that we teach people not just what to think but how to think, to really put pressure on themselves and others to bring their creative minds to what they do every day. And the more that we get tactical about vocational training, putting people in boxes but not helping them sort of create a holistic approach to the way they think, the more that we sort of push people into this more money and status oriented approach. So I think it creates a really strong case for liberal arts. We found that the more that there's a new trend in gap year where people are discovering themselves, not just by entering the workforce right away, but actually going and sort of holistically seeking out greater self-discovery, and that's contributing greatly to the ability for people to come to work seeing it as more than just a means to an end. So I think there are a number of tactics. Career centers starting to really encourage people to ask why and not just what. And at least in terms of my experience with many career centers, there was such a vocational approach to success. How do we start to get people to better self-discover? And it's again a fuzziness, but one that's so critical to what we believe to be the success of early purpose-driven workforce. So I think it's not a one-size-fits-all single answer. I think it's sort of going to take an army. Largely, I think in early education. So one of the things, I was doing a webinar a couple weeks ago on parenting, and I said, look, the one thing that you can do as a parent if you want your kids to grow up and see work as more than a means to an end, really flourish in work, is set that example yourself. Come to work, come home, and don't just talk about work as a chore. Talk about what was fulfilling and enriching at work. And those single instances as a role model, can transform the way that person will grow up and see the workforce.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Great question. I think if there was one area where I would invest, I think it would be early education. I think we have so much to do with the existing workforce, but that's a fascinating area where I think, and Singapore, of course, has set such a new standard in such a good way for early education. I think that the world can learn from. I think has such a unique opportunity to lead. To help our kids, have a new perception of work.
Arthur, time is really catching up.
It is. It's flown by, Sally.
You have shared so much, so generously.
Oh, thank you.
I am sure you're going to have a lot of visitors to your website.
Wonderful. Well, and don't hesitate. I'll put up my contact information here really, really quickly, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I, of course, get tremendous purpose from engaging in this work with people that are seeking it out, and either to bring it to their organization or their own career journey. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me if I can be of any help for any of you.
We want to thank you so much, Arthur, for your generous sharing. I'm sure there are a lot of other questions that some viewers will want to ask you, and I think the learning can continue. And so
well,
now,
thank you so much for having me.
So dear viewers, if you'd like to watch this recorded version of this session, you can do so by tuning in to STADA's YouTube channel or visit us at our website. So we hope that the 60 minutes will inspire all of us to pledge to hire for purpose or be purpose-oriented workers ourselves who come to work every morning on purpose, fully engaged, filled with passion for what we do and why we do what we do. A closing thought, as Jim Rohn said, we all have two choices. We can make a living or we can design a life. We can live by design, not by default. And each day we can choose to come to work on purpose, by design, not by default. And with that, this is Sally Chew, your moderator from STADA and Temasek Polytechnic, signing off from the Global Connect Village, the connecting place at Temasek Polytechnic, Singapore. Thank you and Happy Lunar New Year to all. Thank you for joining us. And above all, Arthur, thank you so much for your generous sharing.
Thank you so much.